Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The people closest to the President of the United States are sending flashing red warning signals to the American people about the danger this man poses to the nation. Tonight, the New York Times published a stunning op-ed written by an anonymous senior administration official whose identity is known to the newspaper, which describes a resistance within the administration in which the author and others are working behind the scenes, in the author's conception, to save the country from the president. Quote, "We believe our first duty is to this country, and the president continues to act in a manner that is detrimental to the health of our republic. That is why many Trump appointees have vowed to do what we can to preserve our democratic institutions while thwarting Mr. Trump's more misguided impulses until he is out of office." That is, of course, entirely consistent with journalist Bob Woodward's account of the Trump administration in his new book, and with just about every single tell-all and blind quote published in the last year and a half, all conveying that the officials who know the president best, around him every day, talk to him constantly, think he is unfit for the office he holds. They just won't come out and say it publicly. By the way, if any of those officials are watching, we'd love to have you on this show. Just call up our control room. They'll patch you right through. We'll talk. According to the op-ed's anonymous author, the president's own cabinet considered trying to remove him from office. I quote again, "Given the instability many witnessed, there were early whispers within the cabinet of invoking the 25th Amendment, which would start a complex process for removing the president. But no one wanted to precipitate a constitutional crisis, so we will do what we can to steer the administration in the right direction until, one way or another, it's over." Until one way or another, it's over. Sure makes you wonder what ways they might have in mind, what they think might be coming down soon. The White House released a statement highlighting the president's electoral college win, slamming the op-ed author as, quote, "gutless anonymous source and a coward." About an hour after the op-ed was published, the president appeared at a White House event with a group of sheriffs and put on a display that did nothing to contradict the characterizations of his temperament, either in the editorial or the Woodward book.
We have somebody in what I call the failing New York Times that's talking about he's part of the resistance within the Trump administration. This is what we have to deal with. And, you know, the dishonest media, because you people deal with it as well as I do. But it's really a disgrace. I will say this. Nobody has done what this administration's done in terms of getting things passed and getting things through. An article was just printed, just came out a few minutes ago. Trump breaks the record for budget gridlock wins. So if the failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial, can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. The poll numbers are through the roof. Our poll numbers are great. And guess what? Nobody is going to come close to beating me in 2020.
Joining me now to talk about today's extraordinary developments, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Senator, the last time that you were on, I said something like, this is unsustainable and untenable and unbearable, the situation we are in, and it's only gotten worse. What are we seeing right now?
Well, this is the latest act in, what is a continuing three-ring circus. It's weakening America all over the world and, frankly, pushing a lot of people away from politics and civic participation. Listen, at the same time, this article in the New York Times is a little bit hard to understand. I understand that, they may be trying to rationalize and justify working with someone that they perceive to be deeply immoral. But, history is replete with individuals who, after the fact, tried to justify working for a regime that they deeply disagreed with, and history has not passed kind judgment on them. I'm not saying that the Trump administration is Vichy France, but we know how this goes down after the fact.
Well, this gets to something that the op-ed talks about that has been sort of the constant central conundrum, which is that the president's instincts and his rhetoric and his behavior are obviously wholly outside the bounds of norms and the rule of law, frankly. But he has been rather impotent in many ways in imposing that will on the institutions. An example, this is the president's tweet just now, the president of the United States in response to the op-ed. Does the so-called senior administration official really exist, or is it just the failing New York Times with another phony source? If the gutless anonymous person does indeed exist, the Times must, for national security purposes, turn her over to the government at once.
Yeah, well, that's not happening. That's not happening. He's certainly implying that there's some legal repercussions for telling a story to the New York Times, which, of course, there isn't under any federal law that I know of. Yeah, these kind of threats are often just that. They're just rhetoric. They're just threats. They're just trying to scare others into silence. But ultimately, this individual's name is not going to be turned over to the White House.
Right. I guess the question is, you said this the other day. We had you on the program. I talked about the legitimacy of the president and the degree to which that's called into question. You made this point that I thought was interesting is it's dangerous to talk about legitimacy in this sort of nebulous space when there are constitutional remedies. There are constitutional remedies of the 25th Amendment and impeachment, 25th Amendment discovered in this. And a lot of people are watching saying, what is the tripwire here? What do we have to see? What has to be waved in front of the American people that gets Congress to that point? And maybe it's just a question of which party controls it.
So, as someone who is leading the resistance to Donald Trump, let me introduce another subtlety here, which is that Donald Trump didn't disguise who he was during the campaign.
No.
Donald Trump didn't run a campaign in which he advertised himself as a deeply stable, thoughtful, nuanced thinker. America had a pretty good idea that they were electing someone who was reckless and divisive, who was going to govern by the seat of his pants. And so that creates another question for the democratic checks that exist on a president who may be out of control. If the American public chose an individual that they knew to be reckless, does that give permission to the legislative branch to remove him? I think those are all questions that if we ever get to that moment in which we're having that conversation about an impeachment power, we'll have to put on the table.
Well, and there's also the fact that as this happens, as we watch this play out, right, on Capitol Hill today, it's this bizarre spectacle of business as usual, right? So the president, after the sort of unprecedented obstruction by Mitch McConnell, keeping Merrick Garland from even having hearings, this president who people around him are running to every reporter and every op-ed page they can to send the warning signals, has hand-selected this individual who comes before the committee today to testify. And it's all just as if we're supposed to, I guess, just say, well, this is just how it goes.
Right, and this really won't stop unless members of his own party start doing meaningful things to stand up to him and stop his agenda. And by and large, what you have seen is a lot of rhetoric that runs counter to the president's, to the way that the president talks, and people willing to talk anonymously about their work inside the administration. The fact of the matter is, the person who wrote this piece is working inside the White House to soften the edges of the presidency, to make him more palatable to the electorate,
right,
to in fact increase the chances that he's going to get a second term. That is the same thing that Republicans who behind closed doors in Congress who tell you that they have deep personal and moral disagreements with the president are doing in pushing his agenda through. So again, none of this really changes unless Republicans are willing to do more than just put anonymous pieces in the New York Times.
What are the stakes of the midterms for you?
I think democracy is on the ballot. I think Trump has been poking and prodding democratic norms. And I think if he feels as if the electorate essentially endorses and vouches for the way that he has conducted himself, the way in which he has challenged those norms in the first 2 years, the reins come off. Yep. And I think you will see him fire Mueller. You will see him start to disobey court orders. You may actually see him take even more meaningful actions against the press. Listen, I don't want to be too apocryphal about this moment, but I do think that there's a chance that he will come away from a win in the midterms feeling as if he has been empowered by the electorate to take the next step on these assaults on the democracy itself.
All right, Senator Chris Murphy, thank you for making some time tonight.
Thanks.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.